Tomorrow morning, millions of alarm clocks will ring. Offices will open. Factories will start. Emails will arrive. By the time the average person retires, they will have spent roughly 90,000 hours working a job. 90,000 hours of alarms, shifts, deadlines, and someone else deciding what your day looks like. And yet, for 99% of human history, that entire concept simply didn't exist. No employer. No wages. No job title. For nearly 300,000 years, Homo sapiens lived without a single one of these things. So if nobody had a job, what did people actually do with their days? Survival still demanded work every single day, without exception. Food had to be found. Shelter had to be maintained. Children had to be protected. But none of it ran through contracts, wages, or a boss handing out assignments. So how exactly did ancient humans decide who did what, without any of the systems we now assume are necessary just to organize a group of people? The answer doesn't start with Homo sapiens at all. It starts almost 2 million years ago, with a decision made by our ancestors that would quietly shape how humans organize labor for the rest of our existence. Researchers studying early hominins have proposed that around 2 million years ago, something shifted in what our ancestors chose to eat. Instead of simply grabbing whatever was easiest, some began focusing on high-reward but genuinely difficult food sources, underground tubers that required real effort to dig up, and eventually, large game that demanded coordination, patience, and risk just to bring down. The moment food stopped being simply available and started requiring skill, strategy, and effort, something else became necessary too. Different people, doing different things. But how do you actually prove people were splitting tasks like this almost 2 million years ago, when there's no written record, no drawings, nothing that directly describes a single day in their lives? The proof, it turns out, is written directly into bone. In 2025, researcher Judith Beyer at the University of Tübingen examined a striking pattern across Neanderthal and early Homo sapiens skulls, dated between 80,000 and 20,000 years ago. Male skulls showed a noticeably higher rate of head injuries than female skulls. The likely explanation points towards something dangerous, high-risk activities like large-game hunting, where a single miscalculated charge from a wounded animal could end in a skull fracture instead of a meal. It's important to be precise here. This is a documented skeletal pattern, interpreted by researchers as likely evidence of dangerous role specialization, not a definitive record of exactly who did what, every single day, across every culture. But the pattern is striking enough that it points towards something real. Some people were consistently doing far riskier work than others. If injury patterns reveal who was doing the dangerous work, what do they reveal about everyone who wasn't out hunting? This is where the popular image of prehistoric life starts to crack. Anthropologists studying hunter-gatherer societies do describe something close to a universal pattern, a sexual division of labor, where physical differences often shaped who did what, men frequently taking on hunting, women more often specializing in gathering, food preparation, and child-rearing. But often is doing a lot of work in that sentence, because this pattern wasn't a fixed law of nature. Among some Aboriginal groups in Australia, both men and women hunted, just different prey entirely, targeting animals suited to different skills, different terrain, different strategies. The rigid image so many people carry in their heads, man the hunter, woman the gatherer, as some kind of universal rule, simply doesn't hold up once you look closely enough at the full anthropological record. And it wasn't only adults contributing. If even the youngest and oldest members of a tribe had defined roles too, does that mean, in some sense, literally everyone had a job, just not the kind we'd recognize today? According to anthropological accounts, the elderly, no longer strong or fast enough for distant hunting or foraging, shifted toward more sedentary, skill-based contributions, tasks like toolmaking, teaching, or processing food closer to camp. Children, meanwhile, were gradually introduced to simple gathering tasks early on, learning the skills they'd rely on for the rest of their lives, not through formal instruction, but by simply being present, watching, and doing. And here's the detail that makes this entire system genuinely remarkable. There's no evidence of a leisure class. No group sitting back while everyone else worked. Early human groups appear to have been fundamentally egalitarian, not necessarily by ideal, but by sheer necessity. Survival required close to universal participation. Everyone contributed, according to what their body could actually do. So if there was no boss, no leisure class, and no one exempt from contributing, how many hours a week did this jobless life actually demand? This is where the story gets genuinely contested, because one famous claim has shaped public imagination for decades, and it turns out to be far shakier than most people realize. Anthropologist Marshall Solins popularized the idea that hunter-gatherers worked astonishingly little, somewhere around 15 to 20 hours a week, spending the rest of their time in leisure, an idea that essentially painted prehistoric life as a kind of relaxed paradise compared to modern work culture. But researchers Kristen Hawkes and James O'Connell, examining this claim more closely in 1981, found a massive inconsistency hiding underneath it. Studies of the Paraguayan ache showed a work week approaching 70 hours. Meanwhile, the low-hour estimate often cited for groups like the Jews/Hoansi conveniently excluded huge categories of essential labor: tool-making, water-carrying, childcare, processing food back at camp. Once all of that labor gets properly counted, the actual Jews/Hoansi work week climbs to well over 40 hours. This should be treated exactly as it stands, a genuinely disputed academic debate, not a settled number carved in stone. The romantic idea of a 15-hour prehistoric work week makes for a great headline. The actual research tells a far messier, far more human story. Whichever number sits closer to the truth, something eventually broke this entire rhythm completely, and it wasn't a boss, a war, or a sudden invention. It was a plant. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans followed food. Now, for the first time, food would decide where humans stayed. Beginning roughly 11 to 12,000 years ago, human groups across multiple regions of the world independently began shifting away from nomadic hunting and gathering, towards something radically different, staying in one place, and growing food deliberately, on purpose, season after season. Agriculture handed humans something they had never reliably had before: surplus, more food than a single day, or a single family, actually needed to survive. But that surplus came at a real cost. Unlike mobile hunter-gatherer groups, who could simply move when resources ran low or danger appeared, farming communities were now fixed in place, tied permanently to their fields, and suddenly vulnerable to entirely new threats: raiders who knew exactly where to find them, and catastrophic crop failures that could threaten an entire settlement at once. Surplus food meant not everyone needed to spend their entire day producing food anymore. Which raises an enormous question. Who were the very first people in human history to do something other than hunt, gather, or farm? This is the moment the job, in something close to the modern sense, actually begins. Farming surplus meant a portion of the population could now be fed by other people's labor, freeing them to specialize entirely in something else. Religious figures, dedicating their time to ritual and belief instead of food production. Political leaders, organizing and governing communities that had grown too large to run informally. Craftspeople, pouring their days into pottery, tools, and construction, work made possible only because someone else was now growing their food for them. The very first job in human history wasn't chosen out of passion, curiosity, or personal ambition. It was made possible by a food surplus that would have been unimaginable to any human living just a few thousand years earlier. Now step back and look at the full shape of the story at once. Nearly 2 million years of early task sharing, shaped by high-risk, high-reward food sources. 300,000 years of Homo sapiens living entirely without formal employment, wages, or bosses, labor distributed instead by age, ability, and necessity. And then, a sudden shift, barely 11,000 years ago, a blink in evolutionary time, that introduced surplus, specialization, and eventually, something entirely new: work as a fixed identity, a title, a role you carry with you every single day, whether or not you're actually doing it in that moment. If jobs are really only the most recent chapter in a story this old, what does that say about the story we keep telling ourselves about what work is supposed to feel like? The next time you wake up to an alarm for work, remember this: for almost all of human history, nobody asked, "What's my job?" They only asked, "What needs to be done today?" We didn't invent work. We only recently invented the job.